Okay, for this demo, we are going to build a slab vessel. Now I'm going to go over a few different techniques for how to do sort of the same thing. So the first thing that we need to do to build a slab vessel is to figure out what the base looks like, what our bottom is. Now there's a couple different ways that you can approach this. You could say take some sort of a template, something that you know you would like to have the bottom be precisely. I have pre-rolled out this slab, so I'm just going to cut in here, and then by following our little template, I'm just going to slowly cut this bottom out. Pretty simple, and it's okay if it's not totally exact, because as I'm working with this, I can sort of shape it in the way that I want. Now I made this bottom slab a little bit thicker because as I am attaching pieces, I like to score them together. Now that's one way to cut a slab. This could be this, even though it's a circle, could also be the side of a vessel too. So a slab is just any piece of clay that is flat, and it doesn't matter the shape. I'm going to put this aside for now. Another way that I like to determine the base of my vessel is to just take a ball of clay and sort of pinch it out like this with your hands. And then what I like to do to create this sort of like random sized vessel is to throw this slab. Works a little bit better if you have a bit more weight behind it, but eventually you get a sort of misshapen slab. And I like to do it this way because in the method that I build slab vessels, I like there to be a little bit of controlled chaos. So I know that this is going to be my base. And see how I'm flipping it between each throw? So I'm not getting too much on one side. When you do this, you're pushing the clay to one side. So I could even do it this way, elongate that a little bit. Now that looks pretty messy, but this will determine what the shape of my vessel is going to be. And I kind of like doing it this way so I can get a little bit, I can take my hand out of it a little bit. Now this slab is pretty torn up on the edges, but as I'm building, I'm going to connect things and clean them up. So one thing when you are working with slabs, you don't want to move your slabs around like this, because what can happen is that even though this is still intact, if your slab is doing the wave and wiggling around like this, you're getting all of these little hairline fractures within your slab. So as you're building, you want to try to, as you're like moving your slab from say the slab roller to your working area, you don't want to just pick it up by the side and sort of fling it onto whatever surface you're working. You want to try to keep it as straight as possible because you don't want these little hairline fractures. As this thing is firing, if there's a hairline fracture through this clay that you can't see, it might start to crack. So since I've moved this around a good bit, I'm going to take my metal rib and I'm just going to compress this surface. We want to strengthen this surface, so I am just running this over the edge or over the surface. I'm going to do the same thing here. Now I only ever do this method really where I throw a slab, or I guess toss a slab for the bottom, and you can do it with other edges, but for the bottom, for me, it doesn't necessarily need to be very perfectly even. You of course don't want one side to look like this and one side to look like this thick. That will cause some cracking, but this method seems to work pretty good for me. Okay, I'm going to set this aside for now. One thing that you do need to be careful when working with slabs is the timing. So this is a fairly thick slab, and I rolled this out and cut it to the dimensions that I wanted before I started this video. So it's starting to stiffen up a little bit. It's also a little bit thicker, so it's not going to have as much flex as that very thin piece that I threw. But when you're building with slabs, you want it to be able to stand up on its own. And if you have a very thin slab, it can tend to fall over. So it's not a bad idea to figure out what type of vessel you want to make, and then set those slabs up before you start constructing. So I've cut this piece that I want to join to this piece. Now before I do this, I want to play with some textures. I like to mess around with textures before I do most of the cutting and assembling. So I'm just going to take a couple random little things that I found in the drawer here. You can texturize with the bottom of your shoe, with a hairbrush, with so many different objects. If you just rummage around in your bathroom, in your tool shed, in your kitchen, there are a lot of different things that you can use to make a really nice texture. You could even throw a slab of clay down on the ground onto some concrete or maybe up against some brick, and you can get some really nice organic texture that way. So this whole piece is just going to be a textured sort of collaborative piece. So this was just a random little plastic object. I also have, in the studio, we have a lot of these texture tools. So for this one, I'm going to set this aside here. I'm just going to press. You can also take a rolling pin and press onto that surface. You want to do this while the slab is still fairly wet. Now, when I press into this, it's going to make the edges of this square uneven, which is why oftentimes I will do the texture on the side of a slab that I'm going to piece together before I piece everything together, because the clay is nice and wet and you can fix some of those uneven edges. So this is going to go on the outside. So I'm going to turn this over. Now, one tool that we have in the studio that I really love is this guy. See, this is a right angle with this wire tautly strung across it. If I were to just piece these two together like this flat edge on another flat edge like this, it's not the strongest connection point. So when you are piecing two slabs of clay together, this goes directly onto the surface, and then you just drag this towards yourself, and let me do that one more time. It gives you a beveled edge that's really nice to work with. See that edge? See how that's like on a corner now? And it's cut, it's a little messy, but that's okay. So I want these two pieces on the outside, and we're going to piece this together like this, but we have to cut this one too. So just going to do the same thing. These are really handy. You can also do this with your fettling knife or a X-Acto knife. That's fine too. This one is just perfectly lined up. All right, so I realize that looks a little messy, but we're going to fix it. You can take a fork, you can take your needle tool. I have this tool that I really like to use. If you use your needle tool for slipping and scoring, which is an extremely important process for slab building especially, because you have these really thin seams. So when you're scoring, you want to do more than just that. That's not going to be enough for these two to blend together. When you're scoring, think about it like Velcro. When you have all of those little pieces of Velcro and they stick together, all of those little loops just like interlock and it creates a really tight bond. So again, if you just had that, that's not good Velcro. The more scratches you have, the more that the clay can start to interlock with each other with all of these little lines and create a really strong bond. Now I'm just going to take some of this water. This is where the slip part of slip and score comes in. I'm just using water for now, but you can mix a little bit of slurry, which is just a little bit of clay and some water, maybe some of your reclaim that's broken down so it's nice and mushy. It's a very technical term, but you can use that as well versus just water. So I have scored both sides, I've slipped both sides, and now I'm going to piece these together. And this is the part where these are a little bit soft, but if you time it just right and your slabs are stiff, they'll stand up on their own. See, this is a little bit too soft right now, but that's okay. So I'm blending this seam right here. And one thing that I want to do is to create a coil. And again, these slabs are a little bit too soft, but that's okay. Normally I would let them set up, but for these purposes, I just want to show you guys what I'm talking about. So that's our seam. For right now, I'm going to add a little coil of clay. I know that's kind of dark, but so I'll turn this slab a bit. So it just looks like a little inner binding of a book. These little clay coils are almost like columns. They're going to help these slabs structurally stay together, and they're going to help with that seam not cracking. But this is not quite enough. So what I like to do, I like to really smooth out all of these coils. And the more you blend the clay, the more you convince the clay that it's all one surface versus a bunch of different surfaces mixed together. So the more you blend this and really make sure that all of these different pieces are integrated properly, the less likely it is to crack. So remember, when you are building, hand building especially, but specifically for slabs, slipping and scoring is your best friend. You can't do it too much. You can't overdo slipping and scoring. And coils are a good thing. So it's a little fast, it's a little messy, but that's what the outside looks like now. Now I would definitely go in and clean up that edge, but there's a lot of texture too, so it kind of hides that. All right, so now we have two sides of my vessel. I'm going to come back to this, and I'm just going to kind of, let's see, just sort of piece these together. This is how I like sort of almost freestyling, or just sort of seeing what happens when you collage a bunch of different pieces of clay together. So I have sort of a plan, but I'm just seeing where this fits best. So I'm going to draw a little line right here to tell myself where I need to slip and score. Now I didn't put that right on the edge of this, and I'll show you guys why in just a minute. So again, you can't score enough. You don't want to score through the bottom, obviously, but you really want to score that surface. And I'm going to do the same with this bottom as well. It's really fun with a slab vessel for me, like I said, to just sort of freestyle. And once you get good at assembling these, it's a lot of fun to just, it's almost like cutting and pasting a bunch of different textures and pieces together to see what sort of Frankenstein vessel you can make. So I have slipped both sides. You don't need a ton of water, but you definitely don't want to soak the clay, but you want enough so it'll stick together. Another thing I do with my slabs is I just kind of move it back and forth a little bit, just wiggle it a bit, because I don't want those pieces of clay just sitting on top of each other. I really want them to like interlock and, like I said, become sort of like Velcro. All right, see if I can move this back here. Now this is still pretty wet. This is why timing your slabs so they're a little bit stiffer is important. You can see this inside here. I'm just going to take a quick coil, again, just to help support that seam. Now I've been blending this with my finger, but you can certainly use whatever you're using to score. Maybe it is your serrated rib, maybe it's a fork. You can absolutely score with your needle tool, but the more little prongs you have, the easier it will be. So I'm going to score this just a little bit just to try to blend it into that bottom. And then I'm just going to take my finger and smooth all of this out. When you get into texturing a surface, it's very fun to see, what sort of textures that you have been overlooking. Like I said, the bottom of your shoe, that shoe print over and over again on a clay slab could be really funky and fun. And your kitchen, that junk drawer in your kitchen that just ends up being a bunch of random tools that maybe you used once, or there's like a bunch of weird pens in there, or old keys that you don't know where they go. Rummage around in that drawer. Okay, so now that this has been attached, I'm going to clean up these edges by taking an X-Acto knife and cutting in. Now I'm going to go back, and I would like to make sure that these seams are really blended together. And I'm going to do that last when I can handle the vessel just a little bit better. I'm also going to just cut some of that excess off so I can smooth that back down later. Okay, so now I have this bottom of the slab, and I have the rest to deal with. So with this, I have already I've pushed that plastic pattern onto there. This can stand up on its own a little bit, and this is going to be a funky vase because I want something that's curvilinear as well as rectilinear, because I kind of like that. So this is uneven, but that's okay. So I'm going to figure out my shape. It's going to fit within the bottom of the slab that we figured out. And I'm going to take that off of there so I can score. I'm going to score this bottom as well. And normally I would take the time to make sure that this is all even as far as the height. I can go back around here and cut off this excess once I have it attached. Oh, and you know what we forgot to do? We forgot to score. I forgot to score these edges too. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with this geometric slab. we're going to score. I'm going to piece these together. Now I'm not cutting the edges of this slab, these edges right here, because I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to run a coil over there to help strengthen these walls, but also just aesthetically I kind of want a little bit of a different seam. I want the coil to cover over these two sides. So again, we're going to make our coil. It's kind of hard to see on the inside of the vessel, but I'm just pushing this down along this edge so you can see that coil in there. And then I'm going to go back and smooth that out and really blend it with the surface. Again, so the clay thinks it's all one piece. Once I've done that, I'm going to do this on our seams as well. Now, so you aren't sitting here watching me build this entire thing, I'm going to go ahead and cut these edges off. Now this is still pretty soft, but without trying to warp the vessel too much, just want to show you guys what this vessel looks like now. We have two really strict, straight sides, and then we have this nice curved edge. Now one more thing that you guys can do, I'm going to go ahead and cut this edge off, and I'm just sort of guesstimating what the height is. You can put this on a Lazy Susan, one of our little turnstiles, and gently hold a pencil at one height and rotate this around, and that'll give you your cut line. But I just sort of guessed because for these purposes it doesn't matter so much, because what I'm doing, I'm making a slab vase. So I have this slab right here that has been sitting on a bisque mold, and it's been sitting for a while. It's got this curved edge, so once I take this off of here, this has a little bit of a curved edge on here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to place it on here, and then once this stiffens up, I'm going to cut this off, and this will become the top of our vessel. And you can do a lot of really fun things with this. I'm going to show you just one example of a fired slab vase. So this was made in the same way. So you can tell, here's our bottom. This was a collaboration vase between me and another artist. This was the seam where I decided I wanted to accentuate the seam and celebrate that and pinch it. But I did all of these patterns beforehand. So this is one slab, and this is the other one. This is the top. And I really like these coils around here. They hide the seam, but you don't necessarily need to do that. I just like a really heavy-handed, sort of clunky look sometimes. I've drilled in holes to this top slab. That way some little flowers can go up top. And then I made these two easy cylinders, and again, same thing, just slipping and scoring them, cutting them so where they fit, so there's a hole all the way through. And that is, this is a really good example of these collaboration or collaged vases that I like to make. So the most important things to remember with your slab vessels are to slip and score, and to really watch the timing with your vessels. And that is how you can make a really funky, collaged, patterned slab vessel.